So, for over the 5 decades, Azim Hashim Premji, as his full name is known, has been one of the trailblazers of India incorporation. Taking over his family business of vegetable oils. I think we have heard this story at various places. At the young age of 21, after the untimely demise of his father, he built one of the India's most successful software companies, along with a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. As of 2019, he was the 10th richest person in India, with an estimated net worth of $7.2 billion. Yet, the one facet of the man which has overshadowed even his business achievements is his altruism, his ability to give. His commitment to the Azim Premji Foundation, a non-profit foundation which focuses primarily on education, totals around $21 billion. Yes, you heard it right. $21 billion, I must repeat it, making him one of the world's top philanthropists. Azim Premji, the man beyond the billions, the first authoritative biography of this iconic industrialist, shows how Premji is a philanthropist at heart and a businessman by choice. A man who wanted to give away his billions but realized early enough that he would first have to earn them. Mr. Khanna and Mr. Sood's book that it peels the layers of Mr. Premji's life while chronicling his professional and charitable work in the context of his many strengths and shortcomings. As a matter of introduction, let me mention to all of you, Mr. Sundeep Khanna is a regular columnist for Money Control as well as the Morning Context, which is a subscription-only business news outlet. In his journalism career spanning over 30 years, he has been a senior editor at publications such as Business Today, Financial Express, before retiring as the executive editor of Mint. The co-author of the book, Mr. Varun Sood, is deputy business editor at the Morning Context. Earlier, he was a national editor in charge of the breaking stories at Mint. He is a Bengaluru-based technology journalist who started his career with Business Standard and in the past 14 years has worked with a number of publications including Financial Times and The Economist. The Economic Times, I beg your pardon. And both of them have recently written a book titled as Azim Premji, The Man Beyond the Billions, which has been published by the HarperCollins Publishers India. Before I get you some introduction of the book, I want to invite both the authors to make some preliminary remarks about their life and about how they approach the whole subject. Then we'll come to the book. Mr. Khanna, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you for inviting us. We can't see most people beyond Professor Navneet, but hello to everybody. I mean, we between the two of us, we've been journalists for close on to 50 years. Bulk of it, of course, is to my credit. I was a journalist for almost 30 years. And, we've dealt with several subjects in the course of our journalism careers. And Premji was always a bit of an enigma, partly because he's a bit of a figure of mystery. He doesn't talk too often. He doesn't meet people in the press too often. You don't see him, very often at industry do's. And, of course, we were aware that he's made these donations, huge donations to his philanthropic foundation. And then last year, when he made the last and the really big donation to his philanthropy, we were kind of intrigued enough to want to look at his life, and that's where really it started. And we spent about a year researching and writing the book. And HarperCollins, the publisher, and our agent Anish Chandy, they kept prompting us with questions, saying maybe you want to look at this, maybe you want to look at this part of his life. And I have to say that one of the most enriching parts of the book was meeting people, a lot of them in Bombay, who'd worked with Mr. Premji some 40, 50 years ago, and I remembered him with fondness. So yeah, just those couple of words, and maybe Varun, you can talk about it.
Sandeep's already given us a quick introduction about how we approach the book. Just a couple of lines. Azim Premji, the way we see it, The story of Azim Premji is probably more important now than ever before, for the simple reason, it also gives us a new way to look at capitalism, where it is a kind of a humane face, and where his philosophy that we are not owners of the wealth, we are trustees of our wealth. This is really of huge significance in the current times where we are living. Probably also because the way he's run his business for over 55 years, corporate governance ethics have been the cornerstone of the way he's ran his business. Now, IT industry in India is probably one of the most transparent, and when it comes to corporate governance, it's always ahead of the rest of the sectors. But over here, Wipro still has an edge over some of the other companies. And if you really want to understand Mr. Premji, we would again like to emphasize a new way of capitalism, a new way of entrepreneurship. After all, yes, his was a family-run business when his father set up the company in 1945. But to his credit, from 1966 all the way until 2019, before he handed over the reins of the company to his son, a lot of things which Mr. Premji did, and it wasn't always a bed of roses. He's had his share of failures, so to speak. But his story is actually the embodiment of also what a student, a management student, or a middle class student, or a middle class executive who's looking to set up his own startup can look at. So that's about the learnings from Mr. Premji. Thank you.
So, the interesting thing is that, it's not like Azim Premji for 50 years has been this philanthropist who's constantly been cutting out checks and, helping various kinds of activities, various kinds of causes. Now, in fact, till a fairly late stage in his career, he was very clear that his job was really to run an efficient and successful business which paid its dues to the government, which paid its taxes. We talk about this incident in the book where, when Wipro shifted to Sarjapur, where they have their main offices, a lot of IT companies were based there. And there wasn't a proper road going from Bangalore to Sarjapur. And these IT companies, they got together, they spoke to the government and said, can you build the road there was a pothole road. It would take hours to get to the office. And then finally, people like Mr. Narayan Murthy and some of the other IT leaders decided that forget it. I mean, instead of waiting for the government, let's just build the road ourselves. And the strange thing is that Mr. Premji was one of those who said, no, I'm not going to participate in this because it's not my job to build roads. I mean, that is the government's job. That's what we pay our taxes for. So the notion that he came into philanthropy later in life at a certain stage around 2000 is important to understand. However, the spirit of the philanthropy probably goes back to when he was a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and his mother. She was a wonderful lady who used to volunteer at a children's hospital in Bombay near Haji Ali, and it was a hospital meant for children who were stricken by polio, and she used to volunteer, help the children there, often cut out checks, help them with money, but she would always be there. And Azim as a young boy, he would actually accompany his mother, and obviously when he's seeing his mother doing all of that work. There was some kind of spirit that he imbibed from there, and through his career he's been known to be an extremely kind man. I mean, there is an instance we've talked about in the book where somebody came to him and was an ex-employee and said that I've left the company, but unfortunately I've got cancer, I don't have the money, and he immediately gave him a certain amount of money to help him out. However, the larger cause of education, of setting up a philanthropic foundation, that really starts happening only at the turn of the century, and maybe it coincided with his his coming into all this money, because after the Wipro's listing of its stock at the NYSE, Azim Premji briefly became the richest man in India. In fact, in those days, it used to be said by certain newspapers that the amount of money that he had, thanks to his stock and thanks to the listing of his stock, he could actually have bought a company like Reliance. So the market cap of given the market cap of Reliance. So maybe around this time he starts thinking, and this is a very simple man. His habits are simple, and like one of his executives said, that no matter how many billions he's made, he eats the same food that he used to eat. He wears the same clothes. He travels the same way. So there is this new thing coming in. Okay, I've got all this money. What am I going to do with it? I don't really have any personal use for it. I'm not going to buy a private jet. I'm not going to buy apartments in the US or in London or wherever. So, he starts talking to his senior people, and, the idea of a foundation comes into being. And being a very thorough man, the kind of man who's a very careful businessman, a careful person, he spends a lot of time thinking through what is it that he should do. And, he had a couple of close associates with whom he discussed. He took the advice of people around him. And then he came upon the idea that, educating the educators was probably something that was a fundamental change agent that could change the way education in India is happening, and that's probably where it all started.
All the people who are there and listening to us. So 21 billion was the corpus amount in March 2019. Sundeep and me just did this exercise. As of 13th November, the corpus of the endowment has actually increased to about 26 billion. Now, how it has increased? Anyone who reads the book will understand that it's not just one cash being donated. There is a component of Wipro shares, there is a component of Premji Invest, and then there is also a $2.5 billion cash which is available with the endowment. So that's just the first quick comment, which is not there in the book. Perhaps it would be of interest.
Right.
Now, coming to the education bit. Now, it was around 97, 98, like Sundeep mentioned. That is the point when he started discussing with some of his senior executives that I have got a little bit of money. He was still not that rich. He was a billionaire, but he wasn't the richest Indian, which he eventually became at the turn of century in 2000. In 97, 98, he started having preliminary discussions that I want to do something big, something to contribute to the society rather than just signing off a 50,000 check or a 1 lakh check. And a couple of areas were discussed. Healthcare was discussed, to give it to the farmers was discussed, maybe to do something for the democracy, it was discussed, and eventually education was discussed. Now in education also, over 4 or 5 months, the discussions which were happening in the field of education was, should it be tertiary education, setting up MBA schools, or should it be the private schooling sector, or should it be the primary education? So by this, I just want to give you a little bit of a, what should I say, a teaser, that it wasn't that somebody who got up one morning and just wrote off a check. There was almost a year and a half or 2 years discussions of Mr. Premji with his senior executives, what he should be focused on. Eventually, it was discussed that it's to be primary education. And one of the quotes, which was once mentioned to us, but we didn't write it in the book, was that the executive asked Mr. Premji that if you are sure you want to do education, why do you want to do primary education? And Mr. Premji is supposedly remarked, if you are going to wear your shirt, before your shirt, you're going to wear your undergarments. Now, I cannot be thinking about tertiary education, I cannot be thinking about university till the time the basic foundation is. And I want to focus really on primary education, because once you educate a child, most of your other problems will be resolved. So as a kind of a true nation builder, and we don't want to really paint him or talk like in a hagiographic manner, but education as a sector was chosen because we thought primary education could kind of rectify most of the challenges or problems faced by a developing country like India. Of course, in education, again, it hasn't been a smooth ride. Anyone who reads the book will understand that the present focus of the teacher training and development happened only around 2011. So the first decade, starting from 2001 to 2011, Azim Premji Foundation, under which they work in the primary education space, they did almost all sorts of experimentation. They wanted to do online learning, they wanted to change the curriculum, they wanted to even give students better printed textbooks. So it was a whole, you see, I don't want to say that loosely put, even in the field of philanthropy, it was more like a kind of an entrepreneurial approach where money was being splurged. If the results weren't happening, they were quickly pivoting to the new. And that is how the present day Azim Premji Foundation focused on education. The journey has happened. In the book, we've focused on it in a lot more detail, but I will not get into many of those bits for now. Thank you.